It kind of makes sense that Brad Marchand slipped in the NHL Network's wingers rankings, but David Pastrnak, that's a real head scratcher.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoke to Be. Today is Thursday, August 15th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. It's free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, and we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Today we're talking about the NHL's winger rankings that were released yesterday via NHL.com and the NHL Network. Two Bruins appeared on them but slipped from their rankings a year ago. Kind of makes sense that Brad Marchand fell a bit, but David Pastrnak, not so much, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. Before we get started, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes, at Ian C. McLaren. Now let's look back to 2023, where David Pastrnak came in as the number one ranked winger according to NHL.com and the NHL Network. This is a list put together by NHL Network producers and analysts. They look at the top 20 wingers. They did the same with the goalies. Last week, Jeremy Swayman coming in at number 4. Last year, this is what they wrote about David Pastrnak. He was second in the NHL with 61 goals, tied for third with 113 points in 82 games. For a Bruins team that set NHL records for wins and points in a season. It was the sixth time that he scored at least 34 goals, something accomplished by one other active NHL player, that being Austin Matthews. He finished second in voting for the Hart Trophy, right wing on the first All-Star team, second player to score 60 goals in a season for the Bruins, joining Phil Esposito, and Pastrnak was productive during the playoffs with 5 goals in 7 games. Mike Rupp of the NHL Network said, if it wasn't for Connor McDavid, David Pastrnak would have won the Hart Trophy last season. When you're game planning for the Boston Bruins, you're game planning for number 88, and he still performed. That is greatness. That was the consensus after 2022-23. This year, our boy Pasta's coming in at number 4. And here's what they wrote. Pastrnak was 7th in the NHL with 47 goals, 5th in points with 110 in 82 games. 1 year after he ranked 2nd in the NHL with 61 goals and tied for 3rd with 113 points. 7th time in the past 8 seasons, he scored at least 34 goals. Again, something accomplished only by one other active player, that being Austin Matthews. He finished 8th in voting for the Hart Trophy, right wing on the second NHL All-Star team. He averaged just under 20 minutes of ice time, led the Bruins in power play goals, power play points, shots, and was second with a plus 23 rating for whatever that matters. Now, the 3 players ahead of David Pastrnak on this list are Mikko Rantanen, who had 104 points in 80 games last season. Career high, almost 23 minutes of ice time, 40 power play points. Sure. Number 2 was Matthew Tkachuk. One season after he had 109 points and was 3rd in voting for the Hart Trophy. He continued to show why he's one of the best in the NHL. 88 points in 80 regular season games to go along with 32 power play points. Now, the big thing, of course, was that Tkachuk and the Florida Panthers went to the Stanley Cup final for the second straight season and had 22 points in 24 playoff games to help the Panthers win the cup this year. That appears to be the main reason why he is bumped over David Pastrnak this year. And we'll get to that more in a moment. Number one, Nikita Kucherov. He had 144 points to lead the NHL, highest point total of his career. He won the Art Ross Trophy, and just an unbelievable year. Now, if we look at the scoring for NHL wingers over the last 5 seasons, we see that the top 3 is pretty well set. And David Pastrnak at least deserves to be in the top 3. If you go back to the beginning of 2019, 2020, you look at the top players, points per game among wingers. You have Nikita Kucherov at 1.48 points per game. You have Artemi Panarin at 1.32 points per game. And then you have David Pastrnak at 1.25 points per game, just ahead of Mitch Marner, who's at 1.24, and Mikko Rantanen at 1.23. Matthew Tkachuk is down past Rantanen and Kirill Kaprizov at 1.11. You can make an argument that Artemi Panarin really got shafted here as well by being the 5th ranked winger, as he's been one of the best over the last several years. Now, I guess they're looking primarily at this past season and also at, I guess, where guys are at in their careers and what they could do moving forward, although Nikita Kucherov, 31 years old. But even this past year, among wingers, it was Kucherov at 144 points. You had Panarin at 120 points, and then Pastrnak at 110 points. And while Pastrnak was a Hart Trophy finalist in 2023, you could make an argument that he was even more valuable to the Bruins this season. That was a loaded roster last year. The gap between Pastrnak and the next highest scoring Bruin was much wider than what you had with Kucherov and his counterparts, Braden Point, Steven Stamkos, Victor Hedman, and even Panarin with Mika Zibanejad, Chris Kreider in the mix. Mikko Rantanen has Nathan MacKinnon to play with. Pastrnak, he's alone in terms of elite status among Boston Bruins players, and without him, the Bruins would be a lottery team. Let's be honest. He carries this team offensively, and to put him below Matthew Tkachuk is just recency bias because Tkachuk and the Panthers won the Stanley Cup. But if you look at numbers over the last several seasons, Pastrnak got 110 points in the regular season. Tkachuk only had 88. So how can you put Tkachuk over Pastrnak in terms of those rankings? It's only because the Panthers won the Stanley Cup, and that was not singularly due to Matthew Tkachuk's performance. So that's a bit perplexing to me. I could see, of course, why Nikita Kucherov was there. Far and away the best winger in the NHL this past season. Tkachuk wasn't even the Conn Smythe Trophy winner in this playoff run. It went to Connor McDavid of the losing team. So to put Tkachuk over Pastrnak is just based on the fact that the Panthers won that team award, not due to actual production. Rantanen also is a bit of a mystery over Pastrnak. He had fewer points. He plays with MacKinnon. Pastrnak doesn't have the luxury of an elite center to play with at the moment. So for me, he should have at least been the number 2 winger on this list. He wasn't the only Bruin on the list, though. We'll discuss Brad Marchand here as the podcast continues and discuss why he slipped in the rankings and perhaps why that makes a bit more sense. Passion, drive, patience, the formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car an MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. And the eBay Guaranteed Fit is available only to U.S. customers. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app, Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Pocket Cast is what I use. It's also available on YouTube. And while you're on YouTube, check out Locked On NHL. All the insight you need from a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with local insights on every team in the league, available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we talked about why David Pastrnak perhaps unfairly fell from number 1 to number 4 in the rankings. Let's talk about Brad Marchand, who comes in this year at number 18. They wrote the first-year captain for the Bruins had 29 goals. The 11th straight season, he had at least 20. 67 points, ranked second on the team behind David Pastrnak, who had 110. Again, look at that gap. 110, 67. That's a 43-point gap. No other winger has that gap between teammates. The 36-year-old left wing continued to be a factor on both offense and defense. Sorry, not even any other winger, any other player, elite player, did not have that big of a gap, proving why Pastrnak should have been more in contention. He continues to be a factor on both offense and defense. 3 shorthanded goals. Since entering the league, Marchand's 36 shorthanded goals ranked first in the NHL. Last year, Marchand ranked 10th on this list. He missed the first 2 weeks of the 2022-23 season, recovering from surgery on his hips, but was second on the Bruins still with 67 points in 73 games, and tied Tyler Bertuzzi for the postseason lead with 10 points in 7 games. The 35-year-old scored at least 20 goals for the 10th straight season, and Mike Rupp said he has him up there with Connor McDavid, Matthew Tkachuk, as far as the most impactful player on his team on a nightly basis. He came off a major surgery, was supposed to miss a significant amount of time, only missed 7 games. He's an absolute gamer, a lot of miles on him. This guy impacts the game so much for the Boston Bruins. And we saw that on full display against the Toronto Maple Leafs in the opening round of the playoffs. Brad Marchand stepped up huge in games 3 and 4 against the Leafs with 5 points over those 2 games. He had 8 points in the first 4 games of the playoffs. Did not record a point in games 5, 6, or 7, and started to make a bit of an impact in game 1 and 2 against the Panthers. But of course, he was knocked out of game 3, and that really was part of the difference in that series against the Florida Panthers. So it's understandable that Marchand would drop from 10 to 18. It's understandable that, he's not at the top of his game. He did come in ahead of Alex Ovechkin and ahead of Travis Konechny. Ovechkin really took a bit of a step back last season as he continues his chase for Wayne Gretzky's record in terms of goals scored among NHL players. He had 65 points, and he needs 41 goals to tie Wayne Gretzky. Could happen this season, more likely the season after. If there's one guy that I think really deserved to be on this list who was not, it was Jesper Bratt of the New Jersey Devils. He, I believe, was on par with Tkachuk in terms of points. He had, a bit behind. He had 83 points, but that's only 2 behind Marner, 5 behind Tkachuk. Certainly in the top 10 among wingers. He really belongs on this list. Again, it's understandable that Marchand would slip. He's getting up there in his career. Not the point per game player that we once saw, but he's still a very impactful player. And we saw that again during the series against the Maple Leafs when he scored those big goals and had that big time performance, especially in games 3 and 4 against the Maple Leafs, where he really put the team on his back and helped them gain that 3-1 series lead. Now, of course, the Leafs did come back and force it to a game 7, but obviously they ended up winning that, and his injury against the Panthers cannot be underrated. He was the target of a sucker punch by Sam Bennett, injured on the play. He did try to continue, but he was taken out. He missed games 4 and 5. There was no supplementary discipline. And Marchand would come back for game 6, but the Bruins lost that game, got eliminated. Who knows what could have happened if he was healthy for that entire series. The Bruins were right there in that series, and a healthy Brad Marchand could have made a difference there. But again, understandable that he would slip. Perplexing that the same would happen to David Pastrnak. Do the Bruins have anybody in the pipeline who might be on this list someday? We'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. I'm a big fan of the Game Time app. It's an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, and they make getting tickets faster and easier, not just to baseball games, but also to all sports events, comedy, theater, concerts near you. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the start of the event, whether it be first pitch or the first song. And they have views from your seat, which I love because you can see exactly what to expect when you arrive at the venue. All you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but just create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase on Game Time. Last minute tickets at the lowest price guaranteed. The Boston Bruins aren't exactly loaded when it comes to wingers at the moment. You could have made an argument that maybe Jake DeBrusk was on the brink of becoming a top 20 winger. That was certainly the case 2 seasons ago when he was in the midst of a breakout before getting injured at the Winter Classic and missing a bunch of games, which excluded him from reaching that 30-point plateau. Who else could possibly jump into that mix? Well, the obvious contender would be a first-round pick in Fabian Lysell, who's going to get a shot to jump into the top 6 at training camp. The Bruins not only lost DeBrusk, but they also lost Danton Heinen, who played in the top 6. James Van Riemsdyk remains unsigned. We talked about him earlier in the week as maybe a guy that they could revisit once Jeremy Swayman is signed. Lysell has an opportunity here to jump into the top 6 and establish himself as a legit top line or top 6 winger here for the Boston Bruins. Now, is he going to jump right into the top 20 in terms of wingers? No. It's going to take a few years of sustained production, but he is still young and he still has all the tools available to become that kind of player. I know a lot of Bruins fans are down on him, even saying he's a potential bust because he's not yet made much of an impact. But this guy is still quite young. He's only 21 years old. He'll turn 22 in January. He had a very productive year for Providence, 50 points in 56 games, entering his third year of pro hockey. Remember, he had 1 year of junior. That was his first year of North American hockey, and had 62 points in 53 games for the Vancouver Giants. It takes, it's not a linear trajectory for first round picks. It's not your first round pick. Therefore, you live up to that billing right away. You make an impact. It takes guys some time, especially guys coming over from Europe and who are quite young and raw. But he's got all the tools available, especially offensively. He was challenged to up his game without the puck last season by Providence head coach Ryan Mugano. He responded, and by all accounts, he would have been called up by the Bruins late last season were it not for an injury. He's coming in to training camp with an opportunity, and there's still every reason to believe that he could become a top 20 winger in the NHL. He's only 21 years old, folks. Don't forget that. After that, though, could we expect a bigger jump from Trent Frederick with a bigger opportunity? Again, he was a first-round pick a few years ago. He's a guy that could thrive in an increased opportunity now that DeBrusk and Heinen are gone. If Lysell can't immediately jump into the top 6, maybe Frederick gets that shot. He's a left-hand shot, but so is DeBrusk, and he thrived on the right side, albeit with Marchand and Patrice Bergeron. He did have 40 points last season. He would really have to up his production in order to get into that zone. Perhaps not as offensively gifted as some of his counterparts. Lysell definitely has the tools to be that guy. It's going to be very interesting to see how things shake out in training camp and whether or not the Bruins add at this position. That's something I've been talking about, and we'll continue that discussion tomorrow as we look at some options for the Bruins in terms of adding to this roster. I hope you're all having a great week. Thank you so much for joining me here on today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, where we discuss your favorite hockey team every single day. Please do subscribe if you have not already, both on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Getting more into posting the shorts daily thanks to this new great tool that we have called Choppity. So again, jump on the YouTube, subscribe, and please do drop a comment on the YouTube or on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, at Ian C. McLaren. I'm your host of Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. Take care, my friends, and we'll talk to you again here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.